Hello, welcome to this edition of the UMGoBlue.com podcast. This is Phil Callahan along with,
Clint Derringer.
and we're here to talk about Michigan's bounce back victory against the Washington Huskies, winning by a score of 24-7.
No, I really don't care about the critics. But it is kind of cold outside, so having a jacket is nice when it does get cold because I get here pretty early, about 5:30 in the morning. It's like real feel was 43, so it's good to have a good jacket.
On the left.
Willpower, just the want. They wanted it more. And again, credit to Coach Fish and their football team. I think they got a really good football team and dynamic players, but our guys wanted it more. And at the end of the day, that's football. It's pretty simple. You got to want it more than them, and if you do that, you can come away with victories like that. Felt like Michigan football. Felt like what it should feel like. When you have a win, it feels like that. But there's still things you look through, and offensively, we got to be able to get those 3rd and 1s, 4th and 1s. Those 4th and 1s we got to get. So we'll go back to the drawing board on that and what we got to do to get better there, because there's going to be games where it's going to come down to that, and we got to just do a better job there. I thought tackling was so much better on defense, and just fundamentally sound, because the quarterback is dangerous, the running back is dangerous. I think he leaves the country with missed tackles or something like that, and just overall great job by our kids.
Well, Clint, what'd you think about that one?
Well, it was a really balanced game. After expecting to see Michigan and USC play a kind of an evenly balanced matchup, I think that's kind of what we saw against Washington Huskies. And the big difference, to me, at least on the surface, is this team, Michigan, plays so much better right now at home than they do on the road. I think even individually, Bryce Underwood at quarterback had a really great game. Certainly don't want to short sell that at all, but it kind of boiled down to Bryce Underwood outplaying DeMond Williams for the Huskies. And the biggest plays in this game, from my perspective, are the 2 interceptions in the 3rd quarter, where DeMond Williams did not recognize what he was seeing and threw the ball straight into harm's way, and both interceptions came by linebackers. Linebackers who were not blitzing on that particular play. And those 2 snaps for DeMond Williams and the effectiveness of Bryce Underwood getting the ball again to Andrew Marsh, I think that's the difference. This game was really nip and tuck into the 3rd quarter until that stretch of plays where not only did the defense come up with those big turnovers, but the offense cashed those in immediately for touchdowns. And that stretch of complementary football turned this game into a 50-50 coin flip to, a winning percentage much more like 80-20 to Michigan. And then once they got that lead, it looked like kind of woke up their old, warmed up some old muscles that they're more used to using. And they leaned on Jordan Marshall in the run game and put it away in the 4th quarter. It was great to see.
Clint, I can't emphasize how much trepidation I had heading into this game. And listeners to the podcast, our last podcast was really a downer, right? And I want everyone to realize that wasn't an act, okay? After heading out to USC and seeing how down the team was after the game, how beaten physically and emotionally they were, I seriously questioned how they were going to come back. And I think what I saw in this game is they may have been beaten physically and emotionally, but they weren't beat spiritually. And, there was a lot of talk during the week about how there were tough conversations.
Yeah, those tough conversations stay in house. There are conversations. Nobody else needs to hear what was said, but we responded. Everybody responded, offensively, defensively, special teams. We responded. So you got to have those. In any great organizations, in any great family, there's conflict. There's things that happen. You got to push each other, and we did that this week. But we got to continue to do it.
And you hear that, right? You hear that's kind of what you expect, but it's one thing to talk the talk, it's another thing to walk the walk. And you know, heading into this game versus Washington, I didn't know what to expect. I always want to believe Michigan's going to win, and I could come up with all kinds of reasons why Michigan should win, but I genuinely didn't know what to expect. And I'll say, the first thing that happened was the Michigan defense prevented an opponent from scoring on the first possession, which we've seen as a bad habit that they've done occasionally. So, that the first quarter, you know, came out good, right? Michigan, ended the quarter winning 7-0, and again, you saw Bryce Underwood hitting Andrew Marsh, which is quickly turning into just a dynamic combination, right? So, but Michigan has all the momentum. Washington comes back in the second quarter, and it's 7-7 at half. And I'm wondering how this is going to go, right? So what was really great about it is Michigan came out, scored in the third quarter. Again, Jordan Marshall came in and again doing a great job filling in for Justice Haynes. And then Michigan scored 10 points in the fourth quarter. And, we saw Dominic Zavada get back on track by hitting a field goal. Zach Marshall had another, catching a touchdown on a pass from Bryce Underwood, right? So, we really saw the defense clamp down, and, you know, just Bryce Underwood continue to impress and continuing to evolve as a player.
Yeah, I think you're seeing Chip Lindsey really continuing to better understand how he can use Bryce Underwood's skill set and keep building on what they've already done. Right? I think the fact that the offensive game plan from week to week, there's a sense of logic to it, a sense of familiarity to it, where what they are doing, what they are learning is building, and what they run in the following weeks are tweaks on what's already been built. And in this game, again, Bryce looked so much more comfortable with his eyes, so much more comfortable and quick with where he thought the ball should go. And I think that is number one, obviously a great sign for his progression as an individual player, but also that the coaching staff and Chip Lindsey as the coordinator and quarterback coach are really doing a great job of building each consecutive game plan based on what they have seen in previous weeks and how to adapt it versus that particular team in any given week. So big compliment to the offensive staff and to the offensive players for executing for sure. But I don't think the final score for me definitely does not reflect what this game was. And if you go back just through the first quarter, Michigan starts with the ball and goes 3-and-out right away. Okay, that happens. You don't want to be too discouraged. But Washington goes on an 8-play drive that kind of gets derailed by a penalty and at the end. And they end up actually creating a scoring opportunity the way that we define that, right, is a fresh set of downs across the opponent's 40. So they create a scoring opportunity and end up punting by moving backwards, which is one of the most frustrating things when I'm putting the plays into my little tracker. It's one of the worst that you see, that they've crossed. You got a fresh set of downs across the opponent's 40. Not scoring is bad. Settling for a field goal is frustrating. But when you're punting after that situation, it's just it's so demoralizing. Washington did that twice in the first quarter, where they crossed Michigan's 40 with a fresh set of downs on two different 8-play drives, and they ended up punting with a missed field goal in between. So while Michigan scores first to go up 7-0, they definitely were behind on kind of a down-to-down, play-to-play basis there. So they were somewhat fortunate to be in the the game position that they were with the lead. But you also kind of have to credit the defense for what we would consider kind of a bend but don't break style. Like, yes, they were giving up yards. Yes, Washington was moving the ball each drive, but Michigan made the important plays on key downs when they needed to. And then in the second quarter, to start out with Michigan having the ball, maybe their best drive until really late in the game, they go 11 plays and 63 yards and miss a field goal. And again, when Zavada misses, it's such a, it's still kind of a shock to the system. And that particular field goal would have put Michigan up 10-0 and really capitalized on what the defense was able to do, holding Washington scoreless to that point. And right after that, Washington puts their best drive together, 13 plays, 70 yards, and scores a touchdown to make it 7-7 going into halftime. So this game finishing 24-7 is really somewhat fortunate that Michigan did not give up points in that first quarter with the way that Washington was moving the ball, but also on the positive side, really tightened up in the second half on defense, and the offense, especially Bryce Underwood in the passing game, continued to move the sticks and kept the clock running. And Jordan Marshall had one of the better, kind of bell cow performances for a running back that we've seen in a very long time, probably since Hassan Haskins kind of carrying the workload himself against Penn State when Blake Corum got hurt a couple seasons ago. It's the last time I remember seeing a guy that he is really the only option, and they just keep giving it to him, and he just trudges down the field. It was really, really a great day for Jordan Marshall in that way.
So it was interesting. And like I said, that's why when I was talking about the halftime score, it it felt bad, right? It's like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Michigan could have been up. You saw kind of Washington putting things together. They had that one drive where they got into, potential scoring position, and then, the defense stiffened up, and then they put together a really nice drive. And, I'm wondering, is this, are they figuring out the defense the way USC did, or is the Michigan defense kind of showing us who we hope they would be? And it's interesting because we had, Cole Sullivan talking about, you know, what USC meant to the Michigan defense.
Yeah, it was pretty much just a gut check. We know, now we have two losses after USC, and it was time. We were coming to a split in the road. Which way are we gonna go? And we needed to bounce back big this week, and I thought we responded well. We knew the screens were going to be a challenge, and tackling in space were going to be a challenge, and those were things we struggled against USC, and we saw that a lot today. And I thought we prepared for it well and executed a lot better this week. I don't want to get into the specifics of exactly what he said, but it was pretty much just we got to man up, and it's time to, come together as a defense. We haven't been playing the way that we've wanted to the past couple of games, and it was time to stop the bleeding and just come together and trust each other. I think we took a step forward today, and we have a lot to improve on, but I think this was a step in the right direction.
So you had, basically a challenge, go down to the defense after USC. And, you had Derek Moore talking about like the identity of the Michigan defense is.
Really just playing like, physical football, dominating all across the board, great communication, all 11, finding ways to attack the ball, creating turnovers so the offense get back on the field, just having great effort and angles and tackling, the ball to the ground. So I feel like that right there showed the live side today. And we just hope to, take it another level with this week as well.
And then, you had Trey Williams talking about what the difference was between, the USC and Washington game.
defense playing better. Us execute. Simple as that. Making tackles, getting the ball carriers to the ground.
And I think what we saw, while Chip Lindsey is finding, getting in sync with Bryce Underwood, we really saw the Michigan defense kind of remember who they are, and I think stand up and really kind of come out in that second half where we always talk about second half adjustments. And again, after the way the second quarter ended with Washington seeming to get some traction, uh, the defense just came out of the second half and smothered them. And I think, as excited as I am to see Bryce getting under his feet and finding some comfort passing the ball, and Jordan Marshall just stepping in and not missing a beat with Justice Haynes being out, it's really the defense that got me excited. And you can, and again, I can't emphasize this more. You can go back and listen to the podcast. I was really down last week. Okay. Traveling out there, seeing what happened against USC, you know, and, you know, I had predicted that Michigan would lose, but I thought it was going to be a tough loss, right? I didn't expect it to be the thumping that it was. And, there was some question. You and I talked about it. You made the great point, Clint, in the podcast. There were all things that in that game that Michigan could fix, they had control of. But the question was, would they? And, Trey Williams had this, had something really cool to say about it.
You can freak out about them because like nobody likes to lose, but you gotta flush it. You can't like a lot of things that a lot of like what I've been telling my teammates was is like we can never let a loss beat us twice, and you see that a lot in college football. A team that might not have they have started the season off good, and then they take one loss, and then that one loss turns into 3-4 losses in a row, and like they got beat by that first loss, and I wasn't gonna let that happen here.
And I had the feeling after that USC game, and I'll be clear, a lot of it was residual bad feelings from last year, where the second half of the season just started to go sideways. I was wondering if, oh, here we go again. And again, you made the great point. Michigan's at home. They play very well at home, but you had a Washington team that came in. They only had one loss. They're still a little salty about losing the national championship to Michigan. They had a lot to play for, and Michigan kind of came in and dominated. And as uncomfortable as I felt at the beginning of the third quarter, at the end of the fourth quarter, I felt great. And it was oh, okay, I really feel that Michigan showed that we're back on track.
Yeah, that stretch in the third quarter where they got the interception, the first one, Cole Sullivan, and then they score on the first play after that, the 14-yard touchdown by Jordan Marshall, and it had a familiar feeling. Again, that Michigan was playing complementary football. The defense stepped up, the offense immediately took the baton and ran with it, and that was kind of a snap back to the positive reality that we've seen over the last three seasons or so under Jim Harbaugh. And what was missing in almost every game last year in Sherrone Moore's first year. So you made the point that we mentioned the problems that we saw in Los Angeles were in the coaching staff and the players' control to fix. And I think the greatest thing that I heard from Sherrone Moore leading up to this week and then in the post game after was that there were some very difficult conversations. And that is what I think you and I were calling for. And we probably could have had a 45-second episode after that USC game if we had just said that they just need to have some very difficult conversations, coach to coach and coach to player and player to player. And it seemed like that message resonated, and there were some guys out. Evan Link goes out in the middle of the game. with a knee injury, and hopefully he will make it back sometime this season. But that could have been a really decisive blow to the offense, and it wasn't. Blake Frazier comes in and I thought played a really, really great game, not only understanding his assignment and making quick decisions, but also blocking through the whistle, which was problem number one for me in the offense in Los Angeles. Just seeing the offensive line not finishing blocks. It turned around. They definitely um, received that message from the coaching staff and made a difference in the Washington game, and it showed. But that third quarter stretch where the defense gets those two takeaways and the offense immediately turns those into points, that was it. You buried this Washington team at that point. And eventually, when it all rolls up and you held that team to 265 total yards, you mentioned before what was the biggest difference between the USC game and the Washington game. It, he, Washington having 265 yards total compared to the Trojans rushing the ball against this defense for 230 yards. That is the difference. Getting 11 guys to the football, doing your assignment in the run game, and not over pursuing, not being over aggressive with the play calling by Wink, just playing fundamentally sound football on defense was the difference. And we're back to giving up, I think, something like 60, 65 yards rushing on the ground against Washington. That's what this team needs. There's no way any team in the country should be gashing Michigan's defense for over 200 yards rushing. And if it ever happens again, we'll be having the same conversation that we did after the game against USC.
We talked about how the defense got slapped around versus USC. And you mentioned, those tough conversations, which Sherrone talked about and the players talked about. And you hit on a key point. Trey Williams said, he was asked, hey, were those conversations interactive, right? Was it a lecture from the coaches to the players, or was it back and forth? And he said this.
But it's more like we a family. So if you a family, families, y'all got stuff y'all have to talk about, stuff that has to be able to address so y'all can keep moving as a healthy and effective family. So that's just all we had to do.
When did you all know that helped?
Right after we stepped out of practice on Monday when we started working on Washington.
You can hear that quote and you understand that, and I remember after that USC game, Rod Moore was asked about, well, what happened on defense? And he was livid. Okay. I've never seen him be this upset after a game. He made a comment about, well, we weren't in position to have leverage. Okay. And the way I interpreted that is where he is on the defense, he can look and see the alignments. And I believe he just knew that they weren't running the scheme correctly, right? And that's a combination of the players and it's a combination of the coaches. And it seems that those tough conversations were a wake-up call, not only for the team, but basically opened up a channel between the coaches and the team back and forth. And it really seems like Michigan as a team, and I say that, the capital TEAM, really took that slap in the face from USC, and instead of it breaking them, they used it as fuel to get better. And, Gio Al-Hadi had a quote.
We ate it. Didn't feel good. No loss ever feels good, but that one really didn't feel good. And we talked through all the issues, and forget about it and worry about, Washington. So I felt like the boys responded really good. We all threw it in the trash and got ready for that week. So just being urgent in everything that we do, not panicking, but being urgent, being ready for practice, on time, doing all the little things the right way.
And they took it in and they used it as an opportunity to get better. And again, I will say this, listen, Sherrone Moore is new here, okay? As much as he is trying to and continue the culture that Jim Harbaugh installed, we don't know if he's going to yet, okay? And when I'm evaluating him now, I'm thinking back to the first couple years of Rich Rod. I'm thinking back to, Brady Hoke. And I've seen tough losses under Rich Rod where the team was lost. I've seen tough losses at the end of Brady Hoke's tenure where you knew the team was lost. And I genuinely did not know what that USC loss was going to do. And what we saw is that this team has the resiliency to bounce back. And I think that's what has me so excited right now is that a week ago I was down in the dumps, because again, you got to see how they were physically and emotionally beat down, and we've seen how that team has bounced back. And we don't get to see practice. We don't know that the players say, oh, they bounced right back in practice and they were firing on all cylinders. We don't get to see that, right? Another interesting thing was, we talked about last week versus USC how Michigan was so susceptible to being beat on screens, and Trey Williams addressed that.
We gonna get squeezed the rest of the year. After we put on tape, what we put on tape versus USC, any offense would be stupid not to run screens against us.
So what are you guys doing in response then?
Practicing them.
He's acknowledging, hey, we look bad against screens. I'll tell you what concerned me in that second quarter was it looked like Washington was trying to dial up some screens, and they had a little bit of success. And I'm like, oh, what are we going to see in the third quarter? And the Michigan defense just shut it down. So again, good for them, good to see, and lots to be excited after a game that was really disheartening the week before.
Yeah, I think for me, what is heartening is that they had the difficult conversations, and that was the biggest question mark. That was scary to us as fans after that USC game. Would they address the glaring issues at the coaching level and at the player level? And they did, 100% that they did. This was not, again, I think from a number standpoint, this was not a dominating performance. It was a back and forth, very close game that Michigan seized the opportunity in the third quarter to put it away, and they did. And that's great. I mean, that's what good teams do. But if Michigan were to play Washington again, it would be a totally different game script. If they gave up 4 drives inside the Michigan 40-yard line in the first half, I don't think Washington comes away with fewer. You know, that was the worst possible scenario for Washington in this first half. So, regardless, they did what needed to be done, and I'm especially encouraged that Bryce Underwood in this game outplayed his counterpart from the other side, Demond Williams, because I think Demond Williams is really, really a good player. And to have Bryce Underwood step up and outplay him in a big spot, that was huge for Michigan. And there's kind of a middle tier right now of the Big Ten, right? There's Ohio State still undefeated, Indiana undefeated. They don't play each other on the regular season schedule. Indiana has already played and beaten Oregon, so they're kind of on a tier of their own. Oregon has the one loss to Indiana, doesn't have to play. I don't think Oregon has to play Ohio State in the regular season, so they're kind of, those three are kind of on a tier of their own. And then there's a question about whether who's going to be the fourth team there, because with a 12-team playoff, the Big Ten likely gets 3 or 4 teams into that 12-team playoff, especially if you're at a record like 10-2, which is still possible for the Wolverines. So right now, I think there's 8 teams that have 2 losses or fewer right now in the Big Ten. So the really have to get the wheat to separate from the chaff here in the middle of the conference, and beating teams like Nebraska and Washington is critical. and the loss to USC, who's also got 2 losses now after their loss to Notre Dame. I think you're starting to see some of the separation in that middle tier, and Michigan's got to keep this momentum rolling, carry the lessons learned this week going forward, because if you drop a game that you're not supposed to in the next few weeks, then all of this is for naught. You know, the lessons have to stick right here, and especially with a rivalry game coming up here on the road. And it would be great to see Michigan put together a solid performance outside of the big house. I feel confident when this team's at home. Can they take it on the road and play a clean game with everybody focused and locked in and able to bounce back and play that complementary football when something else goes wrong? And that's what we saw in the Washington game that we've got to see whether that carries forward consistently again.
So when we look at the stats, Jordan Marshall, 25 carries for 133 yards. Again, averaging 5.3 yards a carry. Awesome. 1 touchdown on the ground, 1 touchdown receiving. Bryce Underwood, 21 for 27, 230 yards, 2 touchdowns. And again, maintaining ball security, which is one of the things that Sherrone Moore credits him on. He talks back all the way back to spring that, Bryce takes care of the ball. And that is something that, is really going to help this team as it goes down this stretch of the season. But again, we talked about it before. You could just see Bryce you can see the gears turning. And as his experience starts to come up to his talent level, really exciting to see, what he's going to be able to pull out. Now, when we go to receiving, right? Hey, Zach Marshall emerged, 5 receptions, 72 yards, 1 touchdown. Awesome. Andrew Marsh, again, 5 for 49 yards. Again, another touchdown. Now we get to, one of the areas that's not great. And, we still have Samaj Morgan, still being the punt returner, still not catching the ball as much as we'd like to see. And then also, when Michigan tried to convert a 4th down, and dropping a pass from Bryce, we can say that Bryce threw the ball too hard, which is, continues to be a knock. But, I'm back with Sherrone. When it hits you in the hands, you're supposed to catch it, especially in that situation. And as much as I really like Samaj, he's kind of playing himself out of, he's definitely not the first option. He's definitely not the second option. I don't know if he's third or fourth at this point. And I think that's what I didn't like about that play call is that, if you're going to throw a pass on 4th down, first of all, I have a problem, Clint. When it's 4th and short, I believe you should be able to go on the ground and get the first down. Okay. This goes all the way back to the days of Bo. If you're in the Big Ten, you should be able to get a yard on the ground. Okay. So I want to see, especially in this game where I thought we saw the offensive line play pretty well, I would have liked to have seen them, get the first down that way. Second, if you're going to throw the ball, I hate to say this, Samaj is not the guy I'm throwing it to on 4th down. He's just not that guy. And now I think one of the things that's hurting Michigan right now is, we're down to our 3rd or 4th option at tight end, which is, one of the things, even last year, the tight end was a go-to with Colston Loveland. And I think we expected more of that kind of certainty at the tight end position this year, and we're not seeing it. But still, Samaj is not the guy I'd be throwing it to in that position. So, statistically, when we look at that, I really, if there's one area that I'm concerned with on this team, we see the defense has been sporadic, but it can play very well. We see the offense ascending, special teams with Dominic Zavada, missing way more than we're used to seeing, and no return game to speak of. I really think we're struggling at tight end, and we really need to see if they're going to play complementary football. We need special teams to do its part, and I feel like it's that meme where it says the defense we're doing our part, and the offense we're doing our part, and then special teams not so much. So that's one of the areas that I'm still concerned after watching this game.
Yeah, I think we still see inconsistency in all three phases that you know Michigan needs to continue working on, and it looks different in each phase. Offensively, I still have concerns about finishing blocks at the offensive line, but I am encouraged by what we saw. I hope that that doesn't just go away because that's kind of a mentality thing, playing through the whistle. What I'm a little bit more concerned about is there still doesn't seem to be a natural rhythm for Chip Lindsey calling quarterback run plays. We do see some quarterback run called plays, and they always seem to be ill timed or not well blocked and immediately go for a big loss. Now, maybe that's on the read from the young quarterback. We don't know exactly what all the details are on those plays, but after seeing in the Nebraska game, Bryce is making so many big plays with his legs, and seeing that also against Central Michigan on some scramble plays, it doesn't seem like they've settled into a good rhythm on when to use Bryce's running ability as a changeup, especially in big moments. And we kind of saw that come to play on those fourth down plays that you described. There was the one missed pass by Samaj, but on the 4th and 2 in the red zone, they go for it and don't get 2 yards. And to me, you're playing 10 on 11 if you just have Bryce handing the ball off on fourth down. You should at least be threatening some kind of quarterback run and making the defense account for the quarterback. So that's where I would look on offense and defense. To me, it's still the play calling. Um, the reason that USC was so effective with their screen passes tells me that the USC offensive staff had a good feel for predicting what Wink was going to do and how he was going to be aggressive and when. Because screens are what you call when you think the other team is going to be aggressive. And I think right now, when Michigan's defense looks its worst, it's when Wink is really, really dialed up the blitz and the pressure, and the players look like they are a step slow in reading their responsibilities and reacting. So maybe too much on their plate, maybe a little bit too aggressive, and then when an offense can take advantage of those problems, that's when we've seen Michigan really struggle in the games that they've lost. In special teams consistency, really, it just comes down to the two specialists, the two kickers, hitting the ball well. Zavada missing as many field goals this year is crazy that we've seen. And most of the time we see he still has really, really great distance on all of his kicks, but he's either pulling them or pushing it, or there's a little bit more movement on the ball than he would have expected. So it's somehow that the way that he's hitting the ball with his foot that is causing the reactions that he's missed. I still disagree that I've seen any bad snaps or bad holes. I just think the kickers need to hit the ball better, more consistently, and that goes for the punter as well. We got to get out of this rhythm where at least once a game there's a punt that goes less than 30 yards from the line of scrimmage. Sometimes in certain situations, of course, you're trying to keep it out of the end zone, but there are times that Michigan's backed up in their own end, and you just need the guy to let it rip. And there are so many occasions that we've seen almost once a game where the punt team comes out and the other team starts right at midfield instead of being back around their 20 or 30-yard line. So all three phases, consistency and finding a rhythm and figuring out how to kind of best leverage their strengths. That's what we need to see, and it was a good first step in what we saw against the Huskies on Saturday.
Now, Clint, do you think Jed Fish was distracted in any way?
yeah, I think he's a major candidate for the Florida job. Um, but that's a third or fourth degree speculation for me. I think when the coaching carousel gets started the way that it has with Penn State firing James Franklin and then Florida firing Billy Napier, some other coaches that are on the hot seat. Florida State is another job that might come open. I think the agents are working overtime, and Signetti at Indiana just got a huge extension and a huge raise. I mean, that guy was making under $1 million a year just a couple of years ago, and now he's almost $12 million a year for 10 years. So there's a lot of money flying around. The coaches are all intimately involved, and of course they're still trying to coach their current teams, the ones that still have jobs. But Jed Fish is an alum from the University of Florida. It's kind of like when Harbaugh came back to Michigan or Scott Frost went back to Nebraska. There's got to be a pretty strong pull to kind of check it out when your alma mater comes open like that. So I do think that Jed Fish may have been at least divided attention at some point this week with the Florida job open, but um, they still moved the ball on offense. You could argue maybe that there was at least one bad play in every drive that ended up killing them, but I don't think that it made all of the difference in the game, but I don't think that it helped either. And certainly there was a role to play when your coach isn't at 100%, and that's kind of what it looks like when your coach is a little bit distracted and you're in a road game and playing 3 hours ahead of time in your time zone. That's the other benefit of playing a home game against a West Coast team. You get the noon kickoff, feels like 9 a.m. to that other team. So Michigan had some built-in advantages in this game, and they made it count.
So it's interesting to me that there's lots of chatter on criticizing Wink Martindale. Okay. Now, what's funny is that there was pretty much all that criticism all last season. And when the Michigan defense really, really came out and just thumped Ohio State, and then even with a lot of players sitting out, came out and thumped Alabama, that criticism kind of dialed down, but it was always there. There's a contingent that feels that Wink Martindale is the second coming of Don Brown, and he bristles to that criticism, which we know. So it is funny because we know that the coaches and the players are aware of the chatter on the interwebs, right? So Wink did not take kindly to being compared to Don Brown, and came up big at the end of last season. And then right after the USC game, it's like that volume on that criticism went right to 11, and there were all kinds of rumors about that Wink was going to be out, and perhaps he should have been fired after that game, which is not how that works, right? Mm-hmm. And it is interesting that the defense, if the defense wanted to get rid of or wanted to stick the knife in, right, they would not have responded the way they did. Okay. And we know, one of the things about Don Brown that we learned after he left and as we talked to players is that there was a gap between him and the players. It was very much, I'm the coach, you're the player, you do what I say, right? And some players took it as a lack of respect. And when Harbaugh rebooted the coaching staff and went younger, one of the things that happened on the defensive side of the ball is they went younger too, and it was more of a complementary relationship. And when Wink Martindale came in, coming from the pros, I think we expected that there was going to be that complementary relationship, and according to the players, there is, right? But it's one of the big differences that I don't see, other than his age. When you hear the players describe him as a coach, it is much more the way it was the last couple seasons under Jim Harbaugh's regime, and a very big difference from the way Don Brown led the defensive side of the ball. So I think people who are criticizing Wink missed that key point, and it's one of the things that the players talk about. The other thing is that, listen, we need to be honest with ourselves, right? Wink was a very late addition to the coaching staff. Okay, he came in at the last minute. So I think that when you look at that, there is kind of a residual skepticism towards him, but it's almost like an ageism. Like you just look and you see an old guy, and I mean, Wink's one of those guys who looks older than he is. It's not the age, it's the miles, and it seems like that's held against him in some ways. But when the players talk about him, they pretty much talk overwhelmingly in complimentary and in glowing fashion, which is not a very different tenor or a very different vibe than what we heard when Don Brown was here.
Yeah, I think the common thread is being stubborn. And what changed last season, the willingness to dial back the aggressiveness because the defensive line could be so disruptive just because of the talent they had last year, made a huge difference. And it simplified things and let guys play faster. Well, now this is a new year. You don't have those same kind of playmakers on the defensive line. So Wink is kind of falling back to who he is at his core in the aggressiveness and trying to give variable looks, lots of different calls, lots of different formations and fronts. And again, they look like there's too much on some of the plates of some of those players. And it's that reversion back to who he is that I think is what makes most of the folks who are still loudly, criticizing Wink. It's that stubbornness of going back to the complexity that may be the root of the defensive problems that we've seen at different times. So we'll see. We'll see. It's still out. What we saw against Washington was certainly a different approach from Wink Martindale after the USC game. They were less aggressive on the blitzes. Again, those interceptions both were by linebackers who were decidedly not blitzing up the middle in those particular cases. But we did still see a lot of the same calls. He's got a lot of tricks in the bag, but I think he's got to do a better job of teaching the concepts to the players who are still struggling with it mentally. And when the players are showing that they cannot execute the call, you got to put it on the shelf for another week and wait. You can't call it just because it's the right call on paper in a given scenario. If the players can't execute it, you got to wait another week until you can install it better. And that stubbornness is the biggest thing that I think we're looking for to change. And it was better against Washington. Let's hope that it stays, that it keeps getting better as they play Michigan State and then get a whole full bye week to try to clean up some of the things that we've seen on defense.
My biggest criticism of Wink is in the handling of Jayshon Barham. And I felt like if there's ever a time that a player needs to be taught technique and control and not just going like a bat out of hell, it's what I would expect an NFL coach to do with Jayshon, right? And I felt like, so the other thing that the missing piece that we don't have here is that we never get to talk to Jayshon. So it's a running joke. We'll be at a player availability and he will walk by and people will yell at him, "Hey, do you want to talk?" And he'll just smile and keep going, right? And so what I want to know is, what are you being coached, right? What are you working on? And apparently he's not a person to speak very much, but I would really love to to ask, like, what were you told by Wink Martindale? You know, what happened when you move from linebacker to edge? Because my criticism of Wink is the edge position is so critical in this Michigan defense. Okay. And when you go back to the USC game, it was if USC knew exactly to go right at Jay Sean. Okay. And it was, they knew he was going to over pursue. And, I used to, as an offensive tackle, right? When you would have somebody, and this is at any level, when you would have somebody coming like a bat out of hell and not hold their depth, right? It was one of the easiest things. You could just ride them right out, okay? We talk about this on the offense. You know when the play is going to happen, you know where, and you know how. So some guy's just going to come like a bat out of hell, ride them right out. And it seemed like USC was able to do that. What I saw versus Washington was a more disciplined Jay Sean and a more recognizing as an edge that he needed to keep his position, okay, and not be flexed in or out, and not to penetrate too deep. And it seemed like Washington was trying to dial up the same kind of attack against him, but he seemed more disciplined. Okay, so the question is, like I said, I want to talk to Jay Sean. Was he told to kind of not play great technique or to force the play against USC, and it just didn't work very well, right? Or was it just not playing great technique? And we don't know, right? But that is my biggest criticism, is that watching the first couple weeks, and I will go back to the Don Brown comparisons, right? The Michigan defense under Don Brown was a bully defense. If they were playing a team they were better than, they could bully them and they could have great success. But when they played a team of equal talent or greater, they couldn't execute, right? So when we saw Jay Sean just terrorizing people in the first couple games, well, yeah, you have a lot more talent. You can get away not playing great technique. You can cheat a little. And my concern versus Oklahoma and USC was, oh, wait a minute. When you have a talented defensive coordinator on the other side who scouts you, oh yeah, they're gonna take advantage of your tendencies. And I wonder if one of the things that happened between USC and Washington is that Michigan self-scouted and realized that they needed to have Jay Sean play with a little bit more nuance. And again, these are all the questions that I'd love to talk to Jay Sean about. It's not just me, everybody would like to ask. And, the next time Wink comes around, it'll be interesting to see what he has to say. The way the sequence of coaches works out, we see him probably once a month. So we're still a couple weeks away from being able to ask him things. It would have been really interesting if Wink had come up on availability